Welcome to Life Stories, where every tale brings you closer to the heart of human resilience and redemption. Today, we share a powerful story of a son returning to his roots, confronting the woman who tore his family apart, and fighting to reclaim what was rightfully his. This journey is about uncovering hidden truths, restoring dignity, and rebuilding a legacy that was nearly lost. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to start today's emotional and inspiring journey. Join us as we dive into a story of love, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of justice. The hum of the private jet's engines was the only sound breaking through the stillness as I sat in my seat, staring out the window at the endless expanse of clouds below. The city of Manhattan, with all its gleaming towers and the sense of accomplishment it gave me, was far behind. Now, I was headed back to Liberty Springs, the small southern town I had tried to forget for the last decade. It wasn't a place I ever wanted to revisit. Not after everything that had happened. But the letter had pulled me back. I adjusted my tailored suit, making sure the cuffs were in place. A sharp figure. My life had turned into something I never could have imagined when I was a boy owning one of the most successful tech companies in the world at just 34 years old. I had defied the odds, built an empire, and found success where so many others, especially people who looked like me, had failed. My world was made of glass and steel, of marble countertops and breathtaking views. And yet, the letter had arrived like a dark cloud. I had learned to live without my past. I didn't need to look back at the things that shaped me, the pain of losing my mother, the harshness of a father who couldn't cope, the woman who had entered our lives and turned everything upside down. But there I was, staring at the plain white envelope sitting on my marble countertop, feeling a tightness in my chest I hadn't felt in years. My assistant had told me it had arrived that morning. No return address. Just my name written in uneven, bold letters on the front. My heart sank as I opened it, unfolding the note. Your father needs help. He is living under unbearable conditions. You need to come back. There was no signature, no explanation. Just those words. A simple, chilling message that forced my mind to replay memories I had long buried. My father, Richard Anderson, had once been a proud man, strong, capable. The one who taught me the value of hard work. He had been my hero once. Before the world fell apart. Before my mother passed away. Before everything that had made our family whole shattered. And then there was Margaret. I remembered Margaret well. Her name still left a bitter taste in my mouth. Even after all these years. She had come into our lives like a storm, calculating, cold, and determined to take control. After my mother died, I had hoped my father would pull himself together, that we would be there for each other. But instead, Richard withdrew into himself, leaving Margaret to take over the house. She made it clear from the start that I wasn't welcome. It wasn't just her sharp words and condescending looks, but the way she made it clear that she was in charge. When I left for college, I told myself I would never return, vowing to leave that painful past behind. But now, here I was, boarding a private jet that would carry me back to the very place I had spent so many years trying to forget. I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut that my father needed me. I wasn't going to allow whatever had happened to him to continue. I had to see it for myself. As the jet descended into the small regional airport near Liberty Springs, the familiar sight of the old countryside spread below me. It wasn't the kind of place that ever moved forward. A town that had become a ghost of its former self. The cracked streets. The boarded-up storefronts. The people who moved through the town with eyes full of resignation. It all felt like a world that had never seen the success I had fought so hard to build. I rented a car and began the drive to the house where I had once lived. I had no illusions about what I was going to find. I had heard the stories, seen the neglect, and feared what I might uncover. The house, once the pride of the town, was now little more than a shadow of its former self. The large front porch, which had once been the setting for family gatherings and laughter, was now a dark and deteriorating space. The white paint peeled away like the memories of a life gone wrong. The lawn, which I had once mowed with my father on weekends, was now overgrown, the grass thick with weeds. As I stepped out of the car, the air hit me like a wave. It was warm, but suffocating, and carried with it the scent of decay. I stood there for a moment, the crunch of gravel beneath my feet echoing in the silence of the afternoon. The house loomed before me, its once beautiful architecture now worn and lifeless. It felt as if the very walls had been drained of any warmth, any love. I climbed the creaking steps to the front door and knocked. The sound seemed to reverberate through the empty house, a hollow, lonely echo that made my heart race. For a moment, I thought no one would answer, but then the door swung open. And there she was, Margaret. She hadn't changed much. Her blonde hair was still perfectly styled, her crisp blouse and pearls giving her the appearance of someone who hadn't lost a thing. But her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, told a different story. They were cold, unfazed by my presence. "Well, look who's decided to grace us with his presence," she said, her southern drawl dripping with venom. I ignored her, my voice firm and steady. "Where's my father?" Her smirk was quick. "James is occupied at the moment. But do come in. It's been far too long since we've seen each other." The inside of the house was worse than I could have imagined. Dust coated every surface, the furniture threadbare, and the hardwood floors I had once polished were now dull and scuffed. It was as though the very soul of the house had been stripped away. As I walked into the living room, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, on his hands and knees, scrubbing the floor with a filthy rag, was my father. His once broad shoulders were now hunched, his hands trembling as he worked. The man who had once carried me on his shoulders and taught me how to ride a bike now seemed like a mere shadow of himself. "Dad," my voice cracked as I spoke. But he didn't look up. Margaret's laughter rang out behind me. "Oh, don't mind him. He likes to keep himself busy. Keeps the place livable." I turned to her, my hands clenching into fists. "What the hell is this?" She raised an eyebrow, her expression cold. "This is life, Michael. Your father made his choices. He's a grown man." I dropped to my knees beside my father. "Dad, stop. You don't have to do this." Finally, he looked up. His eyes were dull, almost lifeless. "It's fine, son. I'm fine." But his face was gaunt, his clothes ill-fitting and stained. This wasn't the man I remembered. My heart pounded with rage, but more than that, with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I turned to Margaret. "This stops now." Her smirk faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. "You don't get to walk in here after all these years and start making demands. This is my house now. Your father knows his place." I stepped closer, my voice low and steady. "We'll see about that." I wasn't leaving until I reclaimed what was rightfully ours. The fight for my father and our family's legacy had just begun. The drive from the house to the small motel I'd booked felt like an eternity. The landscape of Liberty Springs passed by in a blur, the dusty roads and quiet streets not quite as familiar as they once were. My father sat silently in the passenger seat beside me, his frail frame hunched forward, his eyes staring blankly out the window. I didn't say much during the ride. What could I say? What words could possibly make up for the years he had spent in the grip of Margaret's manipulation? As we reached the motel, I helped him out of the car, his hands trembling as he gripped my arm for support. I didn't want to overwhelm him with questions yet. The sight of him, so worn and broken, was enough for now. But I knew I couldn't keep putting off the inevitable. I had to understand what had happened to my family, to the home that had once meant everything to me. The room was modest but clean, far removed from the luxurious apartments and sleek offices I was used to in Manhattan. It felt almost like a prison, another reminder of the things I had left behind. My father sank into the chair by the window, his hands resting on his knees. his face lined with years of regret. I could see the weight of it in his posture, the way his shoulders slumped, as if all the years of silence had finally crushed him. "Dad, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "I need to know what happened. What did Margaret do to you? To us?" James didn't look up. "It's too late. Michael," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from years of not speaking. "The house, the business, it's all gone. I've let it all slip away." I shook my head. "It's not gone until I say it's gone. We're going to fix this." I had spent years building a life far removed from Liberty Springs. I had worked tirelessly, investing every ounce of energy into my business and the world I had built. I had thought I was done with this place, that it had no hold on me anymore. But now, with my father sitting in front of me, broken and defeated, I knew that I couldn't just walk away. This was about more than just reclaiming a house or business. This was about saving my father, restoring our legacy. I pulled out my laptop and began typing, the soft click of the keys filling the room as I searched for answers. I wasn't a stranger to investigative work, after all. Running a successful tech empire had taught me the value of uncovering hidden truths. If Margaret thought she could get away with this, she was mistaken. I would find every scrap of evidence I needed to expose her for the fraud she was. Over the next few days, I dug deeper, hiring a private investigator named Marvin Ross. He came highly recommended for cases involving financial fraud, and I knew I needed someone with connections. Marvin's network of contacts and access to restricted databases would be invaluable in uncovering the full scope of what Margaret had done. Meanwhile, I visited the county courthouse to request public records on the family home and the Anderson family business, the hardware store that my father had run with pride. What I found left me speechless. First, the deed to the family home. It had indeed been transferred to Margaret years ago, but the circumstances surrounding the sale were highly suspicious. The price listed was far below market value, and the timing of the sale coincided with a series of troubling tax filings linked to Margaret's name. It wasn't just a bad deal, it was a calculated maneuver to strip my family of what was rightfully ours. Next, the family business. The hardware store had once been a cornerstone of the community, a thriving establishment that had supported our family for generations. But shortly after my mother's death, Margaret had convinced my father to take out a loan against the business. She claimed the funds were for renovations, but the money had been funneled into an account under her control. When the loan defaulted, the bank seized the property, and Margaret quietly pocketed the remaining funds. But it wasn't just the financial dealings that shocked me. As I dug deeper, I uncovered something far more sinister. Margaret had cultivated a network of connections, local politicians, bankers, even law enforcement officers, ensuring that her actions went unnoticed. She had used these connections to eliminate any opposition and secure her control over everything we had. I spoke to a few of the locals, hoping to find someone willing to talk. Most of them were hesitant, their voices hushed, as if they feared Margaret's wrath. But one elderly neighbor, Mrs. Harden, agreed to speak with me over a cup of tea. She shook her head as she recalled what had happened. "Annabelle always had her ways," she said, her voice low. "Your father was too broken to see it. But she didn't waste any time worming her way into everything. She made sure people knew she was in charge. And anyone who questioned her, well, they regretted it." I could feel the weight of her words, and my anger grew with each new revelation. Margaret wasn't just a stepmother, she was a predator, and my family had been her prey. It wasn't until Marvin called that the full extent of Margaret's schemes became clear. She had been running a long con, targeting vulnerable families, especially those dealing with loss or financial trouble. Once she got her foot in the door, she manipulated her way into controlling their assets, just as she had done with my father. "You're not her first victim, Michael," Marvin explained over the phone. "And you probably won't be her last. She's been doing this for years. And if she gets away with it, she'll keep going." My heart burned with fury as I took notes, committing every detail to memory. I couldn't let this stand. Not only had Margaret destroyed my family's legacy, but she had preyed on countless others, tearing apart lives for her own gain. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. I turned to my father, who had been sitting quietly, watching me with weary eyes. Dad, we're going to take her down. We're going to expose her for what she is. James didn't answer immediately. He simply looked at me, his expression a mixture of regret and resignation. But deep down, I knew something had shifted in him. For the first time in years, he seemed to have hope again. Together, we would fight to reclaim what was ours. And we wouldn't stop until we had justice. The days following my discovery were filled with quiet determination. I knew that Margaret wasn't going to go down without a fight. But I also knew that the time had come to confront her. The house, the business, everything that once belonged to us, it had to be reclaimed. But it wasn't just about property. It was about restoring my father's dignity. About showing him that the man he had been wasn't lost forever. Together, we could take back everything Margaret had stolen. I spent hours going over the evidence I had gathered, sorting through files, emails, and documents. Every detail, every piece of information mattered now. Margaret's web of lies had been carefully constructed over the years, but it was starting to unravel. And I was determined to be the one to pull it apart. I couldn't let her continue her reign of manipulation and deceit. As I sat in the small motel room, the weight of everything pressing on my shoulders, I looked over at my father. James had always been the one to stand tall in the face of adversity. But now, he was a shadow of the man he once was. I could see the strain in his eyes, the toll that years of living under Margaret's thumb had taken on him. He hadn't been the same since my mother's passing. And Margaret had only made things worse. Dad, I said, my voice soft yet firm, we're going to make this right. We have the evidence. And we have the truth. This ends now. James nodded, his hands shaking slightly as he sipped from his cup of coffee. I don't know if I can fight her anymore, Michael. She's too powerful. Too connected. I looked at him, my heart heavy with a mixture of love and frustration. I don't care how connected she is. We're not going to let her win. We'll expose her for who she really is. And we'll take back what's ours. It was a hard conversation. One I hadn't been prepared to have. But I could see the spark of something in my father's eyes, something that hadn't been there for years. He might have given up before. But now, he was willing to fight. And that was enough for me. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Margaret had her claws in every corner of the town. And she wasn't going to let go without a fight. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I had the truth on my side. And I was going to use it. The next morning, I made my move. I contacted the journalist who had been covering some of the local corruption. And I knew that with his help, we could bring the truth to light. I also reached out to Marvin, the private investigator who had been digging into Margaret's financial records. We needed a full investigation to show how far her corruption went. By the time we arrived at the family home, I felt a sense of determination rising in me. The house still looked the same, run down, neglected, and decaying. It was a far cry from the place I remembered, where laughter once echoed through the halls, and my father's pride had filled every room. Now, it felt like a tomb, suffocating under Margaret's control. I parked the car in the same spot I had parked a decade ago, the one right by the old oak tree where we used to play catch. It felt strange to be back. And yet, something about it felt like the beginning of the end. I wasn't walking away this time. This time, we were going to finish what we started. James was quiet beside me, his expression unreadable as he stared at the house. But I could see the tension in his jaw. He had been here too long, been through too much. The years of fear, of silence, had taken their toll. But today, that was all going to change. We walked up to the front door, and I knocked. The sound echoed through the house. just as it had years ago. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't the same scared boy who had fled this house all those years ago. I was a man now, strong, determined, and ready to face what had been haunting me. Margaret answered the door, her face as smug and self-assured as ever. But this time, I could see the cracks in her armor. She knew something was coming, and I was ready to give it to her. Well, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Back for more, are we? I didn't waste any time with pleasantries. We need to talk. Margaret. She raised an eyebrow. Her arms crossed over her chest. Do we? Her tone was mocking. But I saw the flicker of unease behind her eyes. I stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, my presence filling the space. The house still smelled of dust and neglect. It was as if the years of Margaret's control had sucked the life out of everything. We have everything, I said, pulling the folder from my bag and slamming it onto the coffee table. Fraudulent deeds, fake loans, bribes. The truth is right here, and you're going to answer for it. For a moment, Margaret's confident smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing. You don't know what you're messing with, Michael. This is my house, my town. I stepped closer, not intimidated in the least. It's not your house, Margaret. It never was. And now it's over. Her eyes widened for just a moment before she quickly masked her shock with anger. You think you can just waltz back into this town and take everything from me? I looked her square in the eye. You're not taking anything else from anyone, Margaret. This ends today. As I turned to leave the house, guiding my father to the car, I knew one thing for certain: this fight wasn't just about our house anymore. It was about exposing Margaret for the fraud she was and reclaiming everything she had stolen from us. The battle had just begun. As the federal agents escorted Margaret away, the weight of the victory began to settle over Michael. He had not only reclaimed his family's home but had also restored his father's dignity and exposed a lifetime of deceit. The house, once a symbol of loss and decay, was now the foundation of a new chapter. Together, Michael and his father worked tirelessly to rebuild not just their home, but their lives. The Anderson Community Center stood as a testament to their resilience, offering hope and support to those who had suffered at the hands of people like Margaret. With the past behind them and the future full of possibilities, Michael smiled at his father, knowing that their legacy had been restored. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring and unforgettable tales. Share this video with your friends, and join us for more incredible journeys.